My name is Jay, and I'd like to think I live a normal, uneventful life. I work in an office, don't make much, and have a girlfriend, but we're not serious yet. Most days blur together in a monotonous loop. Work, home, repeat. That's why weekends are sacred to me. I have a small country house deep in the forest, away from the city's noise. Just a simple retreat where I can breathe, surrounded by nature. It's the one place where I feel truly at peace. On October 23rd, a Friday, I decided to head out to my cabin after work. It had been a long week, and all I wanted was a couple of days of solitude. By 7 p.m., I was already pulling up to the familiar sight of my wooden haven nestled among the trees. Exhausted, I barely managed to lug my bag inside before the pull of sleep became too strong. I left my belongings on the ground floor, climbed the stairs, and collapsed into bed, my only thought being to escape into a deep, peaceful slumber. But sleep didn't last long. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a strange noise, a scratching sound coming from downstairs. At first, I thought it might be a raccoon or some other forest creature. But as I crept down the stairs, what I saw through the window made my blood run cold. There, outside the window, was a creature. It looked human, but horribly distorted, as if something had gone wrong in its creation. Tall, impossibly thin, with bony arms and a face covered in deep wrinkles, its yellow, sharp teeth gleamed in the moonlight. It had 2 holes where a nose should be and unblinking eyes with tiny pinprick pupils, staring straight ahead as if searching for something or someone. My mind screamed at me to flee, but my body was paralyzed with fear. I stood frozen on the stairs, unable to look away. The creature continued to peer through the window, moving its head from side to side, almost mechanically. Suddenly, it took a step closer, pressing its face against the glass. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized it was trying to see inside. In a panic, I backed into the shadows, hoping it wouldn't notice me. But then, as if sensing my movement, it started scratching at the door. A soft, scraping noise at first, but it quickly grew louder, more insistent. Then came the banging, heavy, repetitive, and relentless. I clenched my fists, trying not to scream, as the creature pounded on the door, each strike echoing through the silent cabin. The banging went on for hours, relentless and rhythmic. Sometimes it would pause, and I'd think it had left. But then it would start up again, louder than before. I sat on the stairs, too terrified to move, until exhaustion took over and I drifted off, right there on the cold, hard steps. When morning finally came, I cautiously opened the door and stepped outside. The door was badly damaged, with deep scratches and dents that looked like they had been made by claws, not hands. The fence around the cabin was broken, and 2 of my car's tires had been punctured. I needed proof, evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. The police would never believe me, not without something to show. So I placed my phone in video mode under the car, hoping it would capture whatever, or whoever, came back. With a sense of dread, I went back inside, prepared to wait another night. Night fell quickly in the forest, casting long shadows across the trees and filling the cabin with an oppressive darkness. I set up my sleeping bag in the attic, hoping that the creature wouldn't find me there. I lay down, tense and alert, listening to every creak and groan of the old house. Around midnight, I looked out the small attic window and saw it again, running on all 4s towards the house, moving with an unnatural, jerky gait. As it reached the front door, I felt a wave of cold dread wash over me. This time, it seemed even more determined, as if it knew I was inside and was coming back for me. The banging started again, loud and violent. Then came the scratching, followed by a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the cabin. It was angrier tonight, more aggressive, and I knew that hiding in the attic wouldn't save me if it managed to break down the door. For a moment, everything went quiet, and I dared to hope that it had left. But then I heard it, the unmistakable creak of footsteps inside the house. My heart pounded as I realized it had found a way in. I lay still, clutching the sleeping bag, hoping it wouldn't come up to the attic. I could hear it moving around downstairs, knocking over furniture, opening cabinets, as if searching for something or someone. Its footsteps grew closer, each one sending a jolt of terror through me. Then it stopped, and I heard it let out a low, echoing scream, a sound that I can only describe as pure hatred. Somehow, through the sheer force of terror, I eventually passed out. When I awoke, the morning sun was streaming through the attic window, casting an almost comforting light across the room. I hesitated before descending, afraid of what I might find. The house was a mess. Chairs were overturned, glass shards littered the floor, and the door hung off its hinges, barely attached. Every drawer had been emptied, every piece of furniture rifled through as if the creature had been looking for something specific. But most chilling of all was a message scratched into the wall, in jagged, uneven letters: "Leave." My hands trembled as I gathered my things, determined to get out of that house and never return. Outside, I retrieved my phone from under the car, hoping that it had recorded something, anything, that would prove I wasn't losing my mind. On the drive back to the city, I replayed the footage, my heart pounding as the video started. The screen was shaky, capturing only glimpses of the creature as it prowled around the house. But there was one moment that stood out, frozen in my mind: the creature turning towards the camera, its lidless eyes staring directly into the lens, its mouth stretched into a malevolent grin. I could feel its hatred radiating from the screen. Once I was safely back in the city, I went straight to the police, clutching my phone like a lifeline. I showed them the footage, hoping they would understand the gravity of what I had experienced. But they were dismissive, chalking it up to a prank or a wild animal. Frustrated, I left the station, realizing that no one would believe me. 2 nights later, as I lay in bed in my city apartment, I felt a familiar chill. I got up and looked out the window, and there it was standing on the street corner looking up at me. It hadn't stayed in the forest. It had followed me. In a panic, I shut the curtains, but I knew that wouldn't keep it away. I could feel it watching me, waiting for the moment when I would let my guard down. I knew that it wouldn't stop until it had what it wanted, or until I left everything behind and disappeared. I never went back to that cabin, but I know it's still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. And sometimes on quiet nights, I hear scratching at my window, and I know that it hasn't forgotten me. I had hoped leaving the forest would be the end of my nightmare. But the creature, it hadn't stayed behind. In the days that followed, I felt its presence everywhere. Every time I walked home after work, I sensed it lurking in the shadows, waiting. I'd hear footsteps behind me, a faint rustling of leaves, and then silence. But when I turned around, there was nothing. Only darkness. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, the lights began to flicker. The bathroom grew colder, and then I saw it, its reflection, faint but unmistakable, standing behind me in the mirror. Its hollow, black eyes stared at me, unblinking, as if savoring my fear. I whipped around, but the room was empty. My heart pounded as I stood there, frozen, realizing that it was playing with me. It wanted me to know that there was no escaping it. Even in the safety of my apartment, I wasn't safe. The scratching noises began again, this time coming from inside the walls. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. to the sound of nails scraping, like it was trying to claw its way into my bedroom. Every night, the sound would come from a different corner, moving closer to my bed, until I could hear it right behind my headboard. I was losing sleep, my mind unraveling. I couldn't think straight at work, couldn't focus on anything except that creature's unending pursuit. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw its face, twisted, grinning, its yellow teeth gleaming in the dark. Desperate for answers, I began to research. I combed through forums on the paranormal, read about local legends, and even looked up old news reports about the forest. I found mentions of strange sightings, stories of people seeing shadowy figures in the trees, or hearing footsteps that didn't belong to any human or animal. But there was nothing concrete, nothing that could explain what was happening to me. Then I stumbled across an obscure article buried deep in a forum. It spoke of an entity known as the Haunter, a being that latches onto those who trespass into its territory. The article claimed that the Haunter was bound to the forest, unable to leave unless someone willingly brought it into their home, by making contact, by locking eyes with it. The last sentence made my blood run cold. Once the haunter marks you, it will follow you forever until it gets what it wants. What did it want? My life? My soul? The article didn't say. It only suggested one possible escape. Return to the place where you first saw it and face it. Only then might it release you if it chooses to. As I read those words, a chill crept over me. I didn't want to go back to that cabin, didn't want to see that creature again. But what choice did I have? It was either that or live in fear forever. Reluctantly, I decided to go back to the cabin. I told myself that it was the only way to end this nightmare. I took a week off work, telling my boss I needed a break. My friends thought I was just going on a camping trip, and I didn't bother correcting them. How could I explain what I was truly doing? I drove back into the forest, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The trees seemed darker, denser, as if the forest itself knew I was coming back. When I finally reached the cabin, the air was thick with silence. I felt like the trees were watching me, their branches hanging low, casting shadows that danced across the ground. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and entered the cabin. The door creaked open, and the smell of rot and damp earth hit me like a wave. It felt like I was stepping into a grave. I made my way inside, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Shadows seemed to shift in the corners of the room, and every creak of the floorboards sent shivers down my spine. I reached the center of the room, took a deep breath, and called out, "I know you're here. Show yourself." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, slowly, a shape began to emerge from the darkness. It was the creature, the haunter. Its skeletal frame, those unblinking, black eyes, and that twisted grin, filled with malice. It stepped closer, the smell of decay overwhelming me. I wanted to run, to scream, but I held my ground, refusing to let it see my fear. "Why are you haunting me?" I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. It stared at me for what felt like an eternity, and then, in a voice that sounded like dead leaves scraping across the ground, it replied, "You are mine." Its words echoed in my mind, chilling me to the core. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. It cocked its head, studying me, as if weighing my very soul. And then it spoke again, each word heavy with darkness. "You have taken something that belongs to me." I racked my brain, trying to understand. I hadn't taken anything from the forest. I barely even touched anything in the cabin. "I haven't taken anything," I whispered, fear creeping into my voice. Its grin widened, revealing rows of jagged, yellow teeth. "Your life, you took it when you looked at me. Now it is mine to reclaim." Realization dawned on me. By making eye contact, by acknowledging its existence, I had allowed it into my world. I was trapped in its grasp, bound to it. There was only one way out. "What if I give it back?" I asked, barely daring to breathe. The creature paused, its black eyes narrowing. "A bargain," it rasped, tilting its head. "A life for a life." I understood what it was asking. In order to be free, someone else had to take my place. Someone else had to see it, acknowledge it. But who would I condemn to such a fate? It leaned closer, whispering, "Bring someone, and I shall release you." Horrified, I stumbled backward. It wanted me to betray someone, to lure an innocent soul into its trap. I couldn't do it, or could I? The drive back to the city was a blur. My mind raced as I grappled with the impossible choice before me. Could I sacrifice someone else to save myself? The haunter's words echoed in my mind, "A life for a life." The creature had left me alone for now. But I knew that if I didn't bring it someone, it would return, relentless, haunting me for the rest of my days. The thought of living with that constant terror, of seeing it lurking in every shadow, filled me with dread. I thought of my friends, of people who trusted me, who would follow me into the forest if I asked. Each face that came to mind felt like a betrayal, a life I would be destroying. But the alternative was unthinkable. Finally, I made a decision. I would go back to the cabin one last time, alone, and face it. I would not bring anyone else into this nightmare. If it claimed me, so be it. At least I would not live as a monster, dragging others to their doom. That night, I returned to the forest, my heart heavy but resolute. I stood in the center of the cabin, feeling the cold air settle around me like a shroud. "I'm here," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Take me." The haunter emerged from the darkness, its eyes gleaming with a hunger that sent chills down my spine. It stepped closer, looming over me, and for a moment, I thought it would finally consume me. But then it paused. Its head tilted as if considering, and a low, rumbling sound that could have been laughter escaped its throat. "You are free," it said, the words dripping with malice. "For now." And then, just as suddenly as it had come, it vanished, leaving me alone in the silent, empty cabin. I staggered outside, the weight of what had happened settling over me. The haunter had let me go, but I knew it wasn't truly over. Even now, in the dead of night, I still feel its presence lingering at the edges of my mind, waiting, watching. It had granted me freedom, but only temporarily. One day, it will return, and I know I will have to face it again. Until then, I live in a fragile peace, haunted by the memory of those black eyes and that twisted grin. And every time I see a shadow move or hear a faint scratching in the night, I wonder, has it come back for me? For now, I wait.